Hello my friends and welcome back to Baldur's Gate 3, hope you're all doing well. Today we're trying something a little bit different. Rather than taking a single character build from level 1 to 12, I'm going to walk you through how to fix all of the companion builds when you first get access to respecs. This is basically a part of my Honor Mode playthrough, and if you're interested in how we got here, I did live stream the playthrough up to this point. And I think that most people are going to arrive at the ability to respec somewhere around level 3. If you take a fairly normal path through the game, you should have access to 5 companions at this point, those being Gale, Wyll, Lae'zel, Astarion, and Shadowheart, and all of them have come with severe flaws with their builds that you'll want to fix as quickly as possible to make the rest of the game smoother. We don't yet have access to Karlach because I think in most playthroughs you're going to end up being able to respec before you find Karlach, although I will, when we find her in this playthrough, if people enjoy this video, do an additional build fix guide for her. Just to quickly walk you through some of the premises of these builds. These are builds for companions, so among other things, we're going to try to keep them as much as possible consistent with their starting classes, rather than just making wild builds that have nothing to do with the characters. And we are also going to make sure that they are viable on Honor Mode, so they don't require any tricks that you can't use on Honor Mode. They don't require any specific items, because at this point in the game, you won't have access to any specific items, really. And you also can't guarantee finding every specific item when you're playing on Honor Mode. Also, none of them will be using Anti-Ethel's Deal, of course, because even if we do want to take that, which again isn't 100% reliable on Honor Mode, you're probably going to put that on your main character rather than on one of these companions. So all of these builds are going to be designed not to need that. Another important thing about these builds is that these are going to be fairly basic build fixes, but I do have full guides for many of the builds up, so I will reference what we're building towards with these characters as I go through them. Let's start with Shadowheart. We have to do this kind of in one take because this is an Honor Mode save file. And like I said, if you want to see how we got to this point, you can watch my 5,000 subscriber celebration live stream, where I played up to this point in the game. And what's really fun about that is that less than a week later, we've already passed 6,000 subscribers. So thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, let's change class here. So I have to try to do this without messing up. If we do mess up, I can cancel out, but if I confirm the respec, then we are stuck with the changes we've made. And at this point in the game, the 100 gold to respec your characters is actually pretty relevant. Later on, it's going to be free, but for now, the 100 gold is pretty important. So let's take a look at Shadowheart and talk about the problems with her starting build. Shadowheart is, I think, one of the characters with the most flaws with her starting build. The stat spread isn't terrible, but definitely can be fixed, and of course she has the issue of just being a Trickery Domain Cleric, which is the weakest Cleric domain by quite a wide margin, I would say. So generally speaking, you're going to want to change that. If you object to that, I did do a lore-friendly Shadowheart build, which you can find here on the channel, that uses Trickery Domain. But for most players, especially starting at level 3, where we want to have consistent and powerful builds that operate without any magical items at all, you're going to want to change her domain. The two domains that I would recommend looking into changing are the two that I believe are most powerful. Those are Tempest Domain, which is the best generalist and all-rounder. I did a build guide on that called The Best Cleric in Baldur's Gate 3. Or Light Domain, which is, contrary to what you might think, actually an incredible support domain. The reason for this is that you get Warding Flare, which allows you to act off-turn, and especially on Honor Mode, the ability to act off-turn to defend your characters is really important. Another thing that I'm going to be keeping in mind here is making sure that we have access to consistency in these builds, because this is intended for Honor, although of course you can use these on lower difficulty settings. But most important, rather than hitting peak power level, is making sure that these builds operate consistently on low levels of resources and will be very safe to play through the game with. So for that reason, I'm going to spec Shadowheart into the Light Domain Cleric, although I think it is also worth keeping in mind Tempest Domain, and Life Domain is good as well, although I think that relies both on specific items to be powerful, and overall is going to be slightly worse in terms of endgame power level than either Light or Tempest Domain, though it's certainly not a bad Cleric Domain by any means. Something that's also worth talking about with Cleric specifically is that it's just such a strong class that having a suboptimal domain isn't a huge issue, but obviously we're trying to optimize these builds as much as possible. Notice this ability spread, which is very, very poor, kind of a complete nonsense ability spread, so let's fix that. We don't need any charisma. We need to get to 16 wisdom. Obviously, you always want even numbers when you are building Dungeons & Dragons characters, because the bonuses to d20 rolls that you make only go up on even numbers. So odd numbers in your stats never matter, and there's very few reasons to take odd numbers unless you're doing something very specific. So one thing that we're going to, of course, be trying to do is fix all these characters to only have even numbers. We want... wrong button there. We want 16 Constitution, both because that will help Shadowheart maintain concentration on her spells, and one of the best things that clerics do is concentrate on spells, and of course give her more hit points, which is going to be very important. Because light domain clerics only get access to medium armor, we need to have high dexterity, so we're going to put the next priority on dexterity, and then finally we have 4 points, which I suggest actually just putting in strength. The ability to reposition using jumps is extremely powerful for clerics, especially because one of the things that Shadowheart will end up doing starting at level 5 is using Spirit Guardians surrounding her in a damaging aura, so gaining additional mobility through longer jump distance can help you apply that to more enemies more easily. We have Warding Flare and also get access to Burning Hands and Fairy Fire. Fairy Fire is a really important spell to have early. There's a lot of enemies that will try to turn invisible, and this can help you overcome them. And so that's really important to have on some character in your party. Getting it for free with a light domain cleric is really nice. For our cantrip selection, we are going to want Guidance, of course. You have to have one, preferably 2, party members that have Guidance in your party, especially on honor mode where you can't just save scum the skill checks. You definitely need the ability to add to your rolls with guidance. It's super important to have access to this. I also do like having access to Sacred Flame, although Shadowheart will have decent dexterity and will actually often want to make crossbow attacks rather than use Sacred Flame. You should look at both against each enemy. It's still important to have this for enemies that take bonus damage from radiant damage, or enemies with very high AC, but that might have lower dexterity saves, and you can use Sacred Flame against them. And finally, for the last pick, I think there is a choice here between Resistance and Blade Ward. Personally, I like Blade Ward because you're still going to be, even only in medium armor, you're still going to be using Shadowheart as an off-tank, doing a lot of melee combat, and having access to Blade Ward, though it's an inefficient action in combat, you can precast it before combat starts, or you can use it if you need to take an attack of opportunity and get away with Shadowheart. It's also a good way to keep yourself alive if you're just trying to run away. You can cast this and absorb one more arrow on your way out of combat. And something that's really important to keep in mind in honor mode is that you want the ability to leave combat very easily. So for our skill selection, there's nothing in particular that you need here from Shadowheart. She can't get access to Perception, which would be the only important skill for a Wisdom character to have. So unfortunately, you can't get that. So we really don't need to worry about her skill selection too much unless you are playing her as your origin character. But this is for Companion Shadowheart, who probably won't be doing any dialogue anyways. At character level 2, you get access to Turn Undead and also Radiance of the Dawn. Radiance of the Dawn is a really nice one because it just is an ability to do guaranteed damage. Enemies take half damage on a failed save, and this is actually a quite solid damage option at low levels. At higher levels, obviously, this will be overshadowed by other stuff, but at low levels, 2d10 plus 1 damage is a lot of damage. Just very good damage output at this point in the game. So it's very much worth having access to this. It also helps that it's radiant damage, because later on, if you get something that applies Radiating Orb, this is going to be extremely useful to apply that. But for now, this is just a reasonable, solid damage option. I'll talk about prepared spells when we finish leveling up. And Light Domain also gets access to Flaming Sphere at level 3, which is one of the best early game spells to have access to. While it is concentration and thus conflicts with Bless, which is the other thing that clerics are mostly going to spend their time doing, this is a great way to ensure safety in combat because enemies will often attack the Flaming Sphere, so it basically gives your whole party an extra hit point bar, while also providing additional damage every round, and you get decent damage from Scorching Ray as well, while being quite tanky because of your unlimited uses of Warding Flare, 14 Dexterity, and medium armor. For your prepared spell list at this point, you want to have Bless, you want to have Spiritual Weapon, and most of your combats are going to start with Concentration on Bless, plus a bonus action Spiritual Weapon. That will cause the enemies to have to target the Spiritual Weapon. Or, alternatively, Concentration on Flaming Sphere plus a bonus action Spiritual Weapon. Having multiple summons out is one of the best ways, especially early game, to prevent damage to your allies. You always want Healing Word, and I highly recommend having Command as well. This is an extremely powerful way to stop enemies from attacking or acting. Very important to pick that up. Guiding Bolt is very good, and finally, you mostly don't need other level 2 options because Aid isn't really that good yet. You have better uses for your level 2 spell slots at this point. Later on you may upcast Aid, but for now I wouldn't worry about having Aid. Command is typically better than Hold Person because it only allows 1 save before the enemies skip a turn, whereas Hold Person allows 2, though you could prepare Hold Person. My opinion, you should just prepare either whatever you need for that day. Something like Lesser Restoration is always good to have access to, or you can just take Create or Destroy Water, which has a lot of utility. Alright, that's Shadowheart's build fixed. Let's go to Astarion.
I shall be here in my cap.
Spending my gold really quickly, let's get into it. So, Astarion starts as a rogue, and you don't really need to make too many changes for him. Of course, his stat spread is poor, so we need to optimize that. But for the most part, a lot of rogues don't make other choices at level 1. So let's clear that stat spread and get it fixed up. We're going to go with 16 Constitution to max out on hit points. Rogues are very single attribute dependent, or SAD, which is a good thing. It's, as I always say, it's bad to be mad, and it's rad to be sad. They only need dexterity, so you can get away with having very high constitution, making rogues deceptively tanky because they're going to have very good AC from their high dexterity, and pretty good hit points from having high constitution. Of course, all of my builds are going to get 16 constitution because I think it's very important to have high hit points. For your remaining stat points, we're going to put 14 in Wisdom, just because it's the most important saving throw, and then personally I like to have 12 in Strength for the same reason. Mobility and repositioning is really important for rogues. You could even go to 14 strength if you really want the jump distance, but because you have the bonus action dash, it's good enough, I think, to have 12 strength. Obviously getting up to high ground with a rogue, and I'm going to suggest building Astarion as an archer here, is really powerful. If you want more on this build, you can refer to my most recent build guide, The Best Archer in Baldur's Gate 3, for a full build guide on what we're going to be doing with this build. Of course, you need Sleight of Hand and Stealth expertise. If your main character doesn't have access to these skills, then Astarion's going to be your go-to guy. It's very important to have a character with stealth access on honor mode to scout ahead and also to run away. A rogue with cunning action dash and stealth is one of your best options for getting out of bad combats. You probably don't need him to have conversation skills, so we can put those elsewhere, but you certainly can take them if you want him to do some conversing, but we're going to suggest putting those elsewhere. He also does come with perception proficiency, which is nice. I'm going to level up here. At Rogue level 2, there's no other decisions to make. And at Rogue level 3, the game suggests turning him into an Arcane Trickster. I'm going to suggest not doing that, because of the 3 rogue subclasses, Arcane Trickster is the weakest by a fairly wide margin. At this level, the best is going to be Assassin, and Assassin is just the best by default, especially for an archer, because you get to make 2 actions if you begin your combat with your Assassin Rogue. Again, for more on that, refer to the full build guide from 2 days ago. But Thief is also good if you have a specific build in mind for that. Arcane Trickster is significantly weaker than those other 2. For the best level 3 build, we're just going to take Assassin, though.
Action, reaction.
Alright, let's fix up Lae'zel here. Lae'zel is one of the characters we need to make the fewest changes to. She actually comes with one of the best builds by default.
In thy camp, as thou
As a fighter, you're going to want to select Great Weapon Fighting, unless you have a specific style of tanking in mind for her. Great Weapon Fighting is going to be the best. She also gets access later on to some Gith-specific greatswords, which you do want to be able to make good use of, because they're very powerful items. So I suggest just taking Great Weapon Fighting as well. This will be one of the best ways to deal consistent damage in the early game relatively safely. Of course, the Astarion build I presented also does good damage, but this way you can really mix it up in melee without having to worry about things. Of course, we need to fix her stats, though, but like I said, she's the closest to an optimal stat spread by far. All we have to do is sort it out so that she has even numbers, make sure that she has access to athletics, which she comes with by default, and that's it. You're done with Lae'zel. Alright, let's send them all home, and we can fix Wyll and...
The Githyank rough. His confidence is an...
Oops, hang on. Have to actually level up Lae'zel as well. Of course, you get Action Surge at level 2 fighter, and then we have to select a subclass. Luckily, the game's selection of subclass is correct. Battle Master is going to be by far the best at this level, especially. Later on, there are arguments for taking Eldritch Knight if you're going for a throwing build, but Battle Master is definitely the best default fighter class, and is going to be the best for most builds that you end up going for. For maneuvers, you're going to want to take Trip Attack, which allows you to set up other melee allies to have advantage, as well as cause enemies to skip turns in some circumstances, and if you Action Surge, you can get advantage on your second attack with this. Very important. Precision Attack, which is extremely important to guarantee that you land hits, and if you watch my live stream with Lae'zel, you know that she has struggled with that due to some bad dice rolling. And then finally, I will suggest taking Riposte. This gives you, while you won't trigger it all the time, because your AC isn't at this point incredible, this gives you a use for your reaction that isn't just an opportunity attack, and it's really nice at this point in the game to already have good uses for your reaction. One thing that you'll notice is that of these builds, 2 of them already have important uses for their reaction, Shadowheart's and Lae'zel's, because we're trying to maximize our use of actions. Something that I talk about a lot is that every character in combat, every turn of combat, you have access to 5 resources. Your action, your bonus action, your movement, your concentration, and your reaction. And so optimal character builds try to make use of all 5 of those resources as much as possible. Fighters get great uses for their bonus actions by default, and great uses for their actions, because they're just hitting things. So adding in a solid reaction means that we are already making use of many of our resources already starting at level 3. This build will also work very well with no magical gear whatsoever, just Lae'zel's starting armor, because you're going to have pretty decent AC, and you will hit very hard, even with just a normal greatsword. Alright, now we're going to send them home.
Never mind.
Speak. Shook. You believe
Yes.
as you say.
I do believe I can survive without you, because we are just in camp.
Way forward.
Skipping through this dialogue really quick.
Dagger happy friend. Darling, it sounds...
And we'll grab Wyll.
I thought, why infect and imprison him, only to kill him?
Alright, well that is extremely buggy. I'm sorry. I don't know why it's doing that. This is dialogue from Act 3. I will try to cut that out, if I remember to.
That's
Hopefully we avoided some spoilers there, but that's a very odd bug that it triggered an Act 3 dialogue, basically the first time we've talked to Wyll.
Talented, of course. That we're
Alright, let's go respec Wyll.
A word, if I may. I shall be here in like as.
That was very funny. Alright, so let's talk about Wyll's build here, having gotten over the spoilers that he tried to dump on us. Wyll starts with okay stats, although obviously we want to fix these, and by default the game wants you to make him into a melee warlock. You can certainly do this, although at level 3 this won't be the strongest. Melee warlocks usually need to be paired with other classes in order to excel, and I did do a lore-friendly Wyll build guide, which you could check out. It's called The Best Melee Warlock in Baldur's Gate 3, and lore-friendly Wyll build guide. Just look up the lore-friendly character builds on my channel here if you want more about that one. For our cantrip selection, we obviously have to take Eldritch Blast. For Wyll, I don't actually think, if you're not making him a melee warlock, you don't need Blade Ward. If you are, it's good because it pairs well with Armor of Agathys. Blade Ward pairs very well with Sources of Temporary Hit Points. But I recommend that every party have access to Mage Hand and Minor Illusion somewhere in it. So here we're going to take Minor Illusion on Wyll. Grouping enemies is really important for Warlocks because you can then hit them with your AoE spells. So that's a very useful one to have. And of course you need Eldritch Blast. For our subclass selection, this isn't a huge consideration, but personally I think Great Old One is stronger than Fiend. If you feel like you need to have Fiend for role-playing reasons, though, by all means, it's not significantly weaker, but the fear on critical hits is very valuable, especially at low levels. It's free CC, crowd control, meaning that you are going to get this without having to spend any resources, which is incredibly good. For our spell selection, in order to maximize Warlock damage, you need to have Hex. That means that you're going to spend your bonus action casting Hex, and then your main action casting Eldritch Blast, which by default is sort of the baseline damage dealing number in the game. If you ever are at a loss for how to determine if your character is doing good damage or bad damage, compare it to a Warlock casting Eldritch Blast with Hex up. If they're doing more damage than that, then they're over the default damage, and if they're doing less, then they're doing weak damage, and you probably need to rethink the build a little bit. Warlocks are kind of the baseline for a solid damage dealer. And then secondarily, I like having Armor of Agathys, because this gives you temporary hit points, can keep you alive, and will be useful throughout the game. Obviously, we have to fix our attributes as well. Wyll starts with 13 intelligence, completely unnecessary, completely useless to Warlocks, so we're going to dump that. Get ourselves up to 16 constitution, again to maintain concentration, very important for Warlocks, as well as just have enough hit points. 14 dexterity for initiative and armor class, and 12 wisdom because it's the most important saving throw. Wyll can be your party face pretty easily, because he already is priced into taking persuasion, so if you want him to do your conversation skills, then just put these into deception and intimidation. You'll have great conversation skills. If you want your main character to do the talking, you can put these skills elsewhere, but I'm going to assume that you just want to maximize his charisma and maybe use him to do some of the conversation stuff, and then we'll just put points in his conversation skills. Level him up here. I'm also just going to pause very briefly to drink some water. Sorry about that. As it happens, when recording this video, I have just recently tested positive for COVID, so if my voice sounds weird or if I'm coughing a little bit, then that's why. Apologies for that. We are going to take as our spell Expeditious Retreat here, because it's very important, like I said, to have access to ways out of combat in Honor mode. So having access to Expeditious Retreat means that Wyll can dash very far out of combat without dying. And then for your Eldritch Invocations, you of course want Agonizing Blast, which lets you add your Charisma to your Eldritch Blast. Very important to do that. And then very important to get that damage bonus, and then we'll take Devil's Sight, because next level we're going to take Darkness, one of the best defensive options in the game. Again, very important to have this level of consistency when you're playing on Honor mode, because Darkness gives you 100% immunity to enemy ranged attacks. You don't even ever have to roll a die. And always on Honor mode, your enemy is randomness, so you really want to make sure that you are trying to avoid randomness. At level 3, we get access to a level 2 spell, so we're going to take Darkness, and then we're going to replace a spell, and the spell we're going to replace is Expeditious Retreat, and we'll replace that with Misty Step, which basically just does the same thing but better, gives you a really great mobility option, lets you get in and out of combat or into unreachable locations really easily, and of course, it being a higher level spell slot doesn't matter for Warlocks, because you always have access to your highest level spell slots every short rest. For a Pact Boon, at this level, it actually doesn't matter that much, so if you want to build Wyll into a melee character, you could take Pact of the Blade. The most powerful at level 3 is Pact of the Chain. The Familiar can be used for scouting very easily, and is very good for that. Pact of the Tome also gives you access to a second character with Guidance, which I like a lot. And later on, will give you access to better spells. Personally, I think that the best option here is Pact of the Tome going on into the late game, but if you just want to maximize your power at level 3 and then respec later, Pact of the Chain is the best. The Quasit can turn invisible, meaning that you can use it to scout locations very, very safely, and also it can provide advantage for Astarion, or a threatened square for Astarion's sneak attack, stuff like that. Very important to get that as well. So Pact of the Chain is the most powerful at this level. Pact of the Tome, I think, is the best pick going into the late game, unless you want to build melee, in which case it's Pact of the Blade. Warlocks, luckily, have all 3 pacts be extremely viable, so which you pick here is less important than... obviously, it's still important, but there's no trap choice here. All of these are very good, unlike some of the other character classes. And finally, we're going to level Gale here. Nope, let me actually cancel out of this, because we need to respec him and get his stats fixed.
Certainly. With silver tongue.
I shall be here in like as.
I should mention also, because I mentioned that I got COVID, I'm fine, I'm like already recovering, do not worry or anything. But, you know, everyone take precautions, be safe out there. For Gale, we want to have a solid cantrip selection that gives us access to the other of Minor Illusion or Mage Hand that we didn't get on our other companion, to make sure that we have access to both of these spells. It's very important to have access to both of these, so we're going to take Mage Hand. Firebolt is the best damaging cantrip, and you usually only need one of these damaging cantrips, so I don't mind just taking the other of Minor Illusion or Mage Hand, or I could take True Strike just to annoy everyone. If you feel like you are going to need a second damage type, the second best cantrip here is Ray of Frost. Personally, I would take just Minor Illusion, but both of those, any of those third picks are going to be good for you. Excuse me. The most important spells to have access to, of course, are going to be Shield. You don't need Mage Armor, because Gale's already proficient in Light Armor for being a human, so Mage Armor just doesn't matter. You need Magic Missile. You need Fog Cloud, which you can, once they fix the bug, use similarly to Darkness to prevent enemies from attacking you. Currently it's bugged and they will just attack you in it, so be aware of that, but hopefully they fix that soon. I also really like having access to Longstrider somewhere in the party. It's very important to get this because it's a ritual spell, does not require a spell slot to cast, and just increases your whole party's movement speed by 10 feet. And Ice Knife is very good because it lays down an ice surface. If enemies walk on an ice surface and slip and fall, then they lose their whole turn. And similarly, Grease can do the same thing, but with a bigger ice surface, which is even more powerful sometimes. So I quite like having Grease as well. Though the existence of Ice Knife makes Grease a little redundant, I still think it's pretty nice to have. These spells, of course, are also going to depend a little bit on what scrolls you've found up to this point. Since Gale can learn spells from scrolls, you should pick your spell selection based on what you don't have. Never take a spell on level up that you have a scroll for, you could just learn it from the scroll instead. For our attribute split, we're going to go with another very standard stat spread. We're going to take 16 Intelligence, 16 Constitution, 12 Wisdom, and 14 Dexterity. This gives you the best saving throws, as well as the best initiative, both of which are very important, and AC, very important to wizards, and of course makes you more resilient to not failing Constitution saves, which are important to maintain concentration on your spells. For our skill selection, there's nothing in particular that Gale needs. Investigation, of course, like he has proficiency in intelligence skills, which you might as well just max out, though typically these skill checks are made in combat, or in conversation, not in combat, so you won't, unless he's also doing a lot of talking, be able to make use of these skills, but for the times when they're made outside of combat, outside of conversation, not sure why I keep saying that, then you'll at least have them on him. Alright, let's level up. And here we're going to have to make the most important decision that we'll make for Gale, which of course is what subclass he's going to be. The game suggests that you make him an evocation wizard, and I'm going to suggest that you don't do that. The reason is that evocation wizard mostly gets the ability to prevent allies from taking damage from your evocation spells. But there's two reasons why I think this is weaker than some of the other wizard options. One is that damage spells are simply not the best spells that wizards have access to. While wizards do get some good damaging effects, they are not going to be your highest damaging class, and they are much more suited to using their versatile and powerful spell access for control and buffs. Things like Fear, Hypnotic Pattern, and Haste, even with the nerf on Honor Mode, are going to be the most important things that your wizard does, none of which are evocation spells. And for the times when you do just want to chuck a fireball at something, you can just not put your ally in the fireball. You don't have to move your ally into the fireball. So Evocation Wizard, even if it is doing the thing that it's doing, oftentimes you can get around it just by good positioning of units, which you should strive to do rather than get lazy with Evocation Wizards. There are certainly some advantages to this, but I think they are outweighed, especially on Honor Mode, by the more powerful subclasses, and I'm going to suggest you choose one of the two of the most powerful subclasses, in my opinion. One of these is Abjuration, which lets you build up Arcane Ward. For more on this, see my video, The Invincible Tank Wizard, because this is going to be one of the best late-game options for your wizard, and also gives you a lot of extra survivability early game. And the other option, and the one that I'm going to suggest taking for most parties, especially if you don't like the idea of your wizard being your main tank, which, you know, aesthetically that's a little weird, is to take Divination Wizard, because this gives you access to the Portent ability, one of the best abilities in the game. This gives you guaranteed die rolls, and you can substitute the die roll that you make with your Portent roll for any roll of a d20 that you see, basically, ally or enemy. What this means is that you have in your back pocket at any time a guaranteed saving throw success, a guaranteed saving throw failure for an enemy, a guaranteed critical if you roll a 20 on your Portent. Randomness is the enemy of Iron Man runs especially, but also just of solid tactical play. The more you can reduce randomness, the more consistent and safer your run will be. And Divination Wizards are the absolute monarchs of reducing randomness in your play. Having access to Portent means you are just much safer and much, much less likely to get randomly destroyed by a series of unfortunate events. For our spell selection, we're going to continue to fill holes here, basically based on whatever spells we haven't found scrolls for. Important ones to consider maybe are Expeditious Retreat. I talked about this under the Warlock section, but still good here. Featherfall gives you a lot of options. Enhanced Leap gives you a lot of options. Find Familiar is weaker than the Pact of the Chain Familiar, but still useful. Another one that I really like to have access to is Protection from Evil and Good, which gives you a ton of ability to avoid certain encounters in the game. It just completely solves at least one encounter, and there's a couple others that it's very good for. So just making sure you have this somewhere in your back pocket is very important, I think. And finally, at Wizard level 3, again, you're going to want access to the best wizard spells. The most important ones to have access to at this level are Flaming Sphere and Misty Step. Again, Misty Step is so important for honor mode play, just really critical for every character that can get access to this to get access to this, because it's going to keep your party alive and lets you just get out of really bad situations much more easily. Other good spells to consider include Scorching Ray. Web is also decent, although worse in Baldur's Gate than it is in Tabletop. Invisibility has tons of uses. Hold Person is very good, although you will often, because this is duplicated with Shadowheart's Command and Warlock's spells, you may wish to not take Hold Person here. In my opinion, you're going to want to have Flaming Sphere and Misty Step up for most combats, but again, this is going to be dictated in part at least by what scrolls you have found. Also very good to have access to is Cloud of Daggers, because it doesn't allow a save and just deals guaranteed damage, which can be very important in certain combats. Alright, that is our look at fixing every Origin character's build. Well, not every Origin character, but starting at this level, when you get access to respecs, I suggest that these are the respecs that you make in order to make your Honor Mode playthrough, or Tactician or below playthrough, as smooth as possible. As always, my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Do let me know if you liked this format and want to see more of it, this kind of thing. I will also probably bring you like boss fights from this playthrough as I continue on it, and if you want to watch the whole playthrough up to this point, I did live stream it. I do not guarantee live streaming the rest of it all in order, but currently everything that is part of this playthrough is available on the channel right here. Alright, my friends, hope that you've enjoyed this video, and of course, if you have, do please take the time to leave a comment, like the video, both of those help a ton with the algorithm, and you can subscribe to my channel for more of this and other strategy game content. Take care of each other, be well, and I'll catch you next time.